Hey there, YouTubers and beginning programmers. So, in this quick tutorial, it's more of an explanation than a tutorial. So, what I wanted to talk about was uh, how you query the web. So, in most cases, when you query the web, and let's say, for example, you go to Google and you see the parameters, for example, here you see where it says search, and then you see a question mark, and then you see parameters there. Q equals web plus API and so on. That's one parameter. This whole idea here is one parameter. This is using a query string. This is not using RESTful. So there's the query string. And when you write code, you can actually take this apart. And on the back end, you can do something with that information. So for example, let's say that you were querying books, and I'll just make up a query here. Let's say, for example, that this was your API. Let's say that was your website. You say, for example, book ID equals 123 and so on. And maybe title or author equals something else. Let's say king, for example, right? So that would give you enough information to be able to query it. Now, this is off the query string. So typically, you can use the web for querying for information, and your browser does it a lot on your behalf when you click on links and stuff like that, and you don't even pay attention to the actual request. So for example, like if I click on this link, for example, you notice that it takes me here and there's some information. Now in this case, you might not see query parameters, so there may actually be information in here where these query parameters, and that's using RESTful. So there's a difference in RESTful. So I think, let's say, if we look for a RESTful API sample, if we look for a RESTful API example, we can, let's see, let's take this guy's approach, and let's just drill down, and we'll see that he has some. Okay, so he's doing a lot of setup. So here he's written something where you see in his class, and this is, what is this? This is, it looks like Java. So in this case, you see that the path to his class is hello. So in the case, the server would be like, for example, let's say hello here, right? That's just the first part, but you notice that there's more to it. So in this case, he's saying this is a GET request, right? And it's going to return text XML. So when this executes, it's going to return XML. So if you type hello, it's going to return this XML back to the client, right? If you were to type it in the browser. But the browser is only one way of querying for information. There's other ways. The applications can actually query. Programmatically, you can make web requests and they'll come back to you. So. But in this case, you're just seeing the gets. Let's see if he gets into using parameters. So you can see here, let's see another example. Okay, still to do, but this to do doesn't do anything other than get one and get the other. And this is just all he's doing for the different types of gets. There's no parameters. It's just depending on the type of information, type of request that you send, on the media type that you're accepting, you can send, like in his case, application JSON and text XML. Let's see if he gets into parameters real quick. Okay, so here you see something a little bit different. Still no parameters. Still, he's going to have something, but you see where he's saying, okay, the media type here, when you request JSON, it's going to return this for the get and text XML here. But you notice that there's some verbs also. So there's verbs to be concerned about. In this case, it's a put. So put is normally used for updating something. And we're going to get into that a little bit because put is going to be a little bit different than get. And same thing with anything that changes, that modifies data on the back end, put, delete, and post will be a little bit different. So if we look at something like, for example, Postman, if we look at Postman, we can see the actual request. Postman is a tool that allows you to query the web without the browser. So you can actually make pretty raw requests. So for example, let's say that I wanted to do this request, right? So that's not this. Let's refresh it. If I wanted to make this request in Postman, I can open up Postman and I can put the request right up here. Oh, for some reason I'm not able to paste it. Right click and paste it. So I can send it, and let's see if it gets me there. Okay, you notice that I got the information. It's pretty raw. Okay, now this is the pretty version. Okay, you can select raw and it'll show me exactly how it looks, right? And it shows me information and all this stuff. So this is a good way to get the information. But one of the things about it is that you see and you don't see with your browser is that there's something called headers. So with requests, a lot of times you have to send down headers, right? So a lot of times when you send headers, for example, and headers are just the concept of a key and a value. So for example, in this case, there's accept ranges, this is bias, cache control. Now when I make my request, I can also send headers, but you know, it's up to the other end, the receiving end, to do something with that header. An example of a request header could be the authorization that we send. For example, when you're dealing with a web API, the difference between a web API and a web page is that your browser will usually go to the web API, the web page, and it has a lot of HTML, which is the formatting language and the cascading style sheets to display the data. But when you're dealing with a web API, you're usually dealing with you're only dealing with data. So you're not dealing with that. And the web is disconnected anyway. So one of the things that has come along with web development over the years is that when you're on for example, on a site like Facebook or anything, you have a session, and that session usually you're holding onto a session cookie, and that session is what keeps you going after the same information. That's how you authenticate. Once you log in, it uses that session cookie to make the request back and forth. So for example, if you're out here and you have you're the client, excuse me, my shortcuts on this are not working, so, and I wonder why, because it's supposed to give me a rectangle. So you are the client, so this is your computer, your browser, whatever, and then you're making requests across the web. So you're making a request, and on the back end somewhere there's a server. So you have a server out here that's listening for requests, and you make your request. So you're sending that request across the web, and it has to return with what they call a response. So then it'll come right back, and give you that response. Well, when you're dealing with normal web application, there's a session, and what you have is a session cookie. So there's a session cookie that's being transported with your request every time, and you can kind of see that over here on Postman. If we make something, you can actually see, if you were to take control of your cookies, you would see a cookie here, something that's stored, and you could actually see the cookie that's being passed around. That session cookie usually has some stuff and some information about who the user is, or you know, the session. Usually it's just a session ID, and the server keeps track of those sessions. So when a session comes in and knows, hey, this guy is dealing with this session and this is his information or her information, and keeps that intact. When you're dealing with web APIs, for example, a web API like I think Giphy is a good example of a web API where you send it a request and it has to come back with the information. Well, you typically don't want to deal directly with any kind of cookies. It doesn't want to hold on to sessions on the back end. So usually and that might be a bad example because in your case, you may create your own APIs. Let's say, for example, that you have a server somewhere and this is your server and this right here may be the, let's see if I can do, not sure if I can do text. Can I do text? No, apparently not. So let's say that I wanted to just send requests and I'm not connected. Let's say, for example, that I have they can come in through a browser or they can come in through a iPhone application or Android application. I still want those services to handle that data the way they handle it. So I still want to be able to have those services respond, but the problem comes that they have to know on the back end whose data they're looking at. So you don't want just anybody having access to all the data. You want to be able to give them access to only their data and maybe even restrict permissions to what they can do on the back end. So usually what you do in that case is you're going to have something in the header along with the request. So initially you're probably going to log in. So you log in using some kind of user password authentication. You get the request, and when it comes back, it'll give you some kind of token. Usually that's done with things like some kind of OAuth or JOT token, JWT. And then you keep that token alive, so every time you make the transactions, you just transfer the tokens. So you will transfer those tokens back and forth, and that way the application knows who you are, and it will know what to do. And usually in that token, you will send some kind of user information so that it can look up what permissions you have and what roles you have and that sort of thing. So one of the things, I guess, the important stuff is that on a GET, you have headers, so you could actually have custom headers. So for example, let's say that you had an API where maybe you want to have an API where you have HTTP and you have your domain, and maybe you want to have a file service, right? So maybe you call it API, and then you say file service, and then you have maybe like a file ID, right? So you have files. And then the ID could be, whatever ID it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the backend can take this apart and take this as a parameter for the file ID. However, the information for the authorization may be in here in the form of an authorization token. And there's ways to do that. I think that for headers, if you look up the authorization, how to insert JOT authorization token in header, I think you can find that all it is so let's see, they have an example here for Postman, and here it tells you, okay, this guy's asking a question, how do I enter it? And then this guy's going to respond and say, look, okay, this guy's doing it programmatically. So I think the key is that this guy's on the right track. I think it's just authorization, and then you got to say bearer. So for example, if I go to Postman, my authorization token would be something like this, and you can already see it. And then I would say bearer, and then whatever my actual token is, and then I would paste that token, and that would authenticate me and allow me to use this API if this was an actual API. So you can put a lot of custom keys and everything in your header and your request. So notice that in a GET, you don't have a body. All you have are headers that you can pass, and then on the back end, programmatically, there's a way to extract that information. We'll get more into that once we start getting into the nitty-gritty details of that. For now, just know that you can pass queries up here. Sometimes you don't want your users to actually see that information. You can pass it certainly, but you don't want to have a lot of information being passed in your URL. You want to kind of protect it down here in the authorization, just kind of hide it. But even when you send stuff like this, it may be encrypted or whatever, so they still can't decrypt the information, right? Now, if I was to change this to a post, let's say that I actually wanted to update this file or something, right? Say, for example, I wanted to update it, I might do a post, right? And in my case, a post, you notice that I can have headers. However, I additionally have body. And the body is usually, if you think of it like a form, and I can have form data, right, where I have keys and forms, or I can have raw, right? And I think I don't see here where I can set the type. Oh yeah, here it is. I can actually send a Json data. So for example, I can send Json data here, and I can just send a JSON object, any valid JSON. I can say name Joe, for example. And I'm just making stuff up, right? And I can say ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And then I can send encoded data. And typically when you're filling out a form, when you're sending a request, anything that's going to update, you can send data. Now you can also send binary data. Like if you're uploading a file, you can actually send the file in the contents and send it right up. So these things are kind of important to know, and I know they get down to gritty details, but if you understand these things, once you start doing the web development side of things, you're going to have a really easy time understanding. It's just a matter of, hey, how do I extract this information? How do I get that? And that's a lot better once you have the understanding how it works, because that way it makes it a lot easier for you to pull that information out of, doing what you need, instead of just wondering, well, why does this work? What does this mean? Or what does that mean? So with this, you already know, okay, now information gets passed in the body on a post request, or post, not just post, but also put you're updating, patch maybe, Of course, delete's a little bit different, because delete, typically you are going to send information, maybe an idea of what you're going to delete on the back end. But that's really all I wanted to cover at this point. We're going to talk more about implementations on the back end of a server, and it can be language independent. You can use different languages. You can use JavaScript on Node. For example, you can use Ruby on Rails for the back end. You can use ASP.NET, MVC, Web API in the C# world. Just a lot of different things. You can use Java. Java has a lot of different options to create services. And then also for web pages, you can do different things. So there's ways, but it'll help to understand that, because one thing you have to keep in mind with all the hacking and everything that's going on, you want to be able to secure your backend. So and it becomes really important at that point to understand exactly how the requests work, just beyond just the requests here and queries and parameters here, but rather understanding headers and how you extract that information out of the header, and how you extract information out of the body, and so on. Typically forms, anytime you do forms, they go in the body. So like, for example, if I did form data like this, I can add a bunch of keys. For example, one of them would be name, or I can say first name. Let's say that my key would be first name. And this would be the names you would actually give to your controls in your form, in your web form. So for example, this could be first name, and then right, and then last name, and then whatever. But this, since Postman is just a tool to help you do it without actually writing the web page, you can just call directly into something, and it allows you to execute that. It's a good way to demonstrate how, and this is not exactly how a web request looks, but it allows you to kind of go down a level from the web instead of looking directly at the web, because so much is hidden from you. This actually converts it to an actual real request, which will look more like just plain old text. If you look at, for example, let's say whatever, right? And I don't think I can look at the raw. Okay, so I look at the form data there. And if I want to look at the request, I think I can send it. It's gonna time out. It's not gonna have anything. But sometimes, like if I go here and I refresh this and I actually look at in the browser and I just hit the F12 key, and if I look at network and I look at these requests, right, I can actually see the details sometimes. And let's see, I don't want to look at the console. I want to look at network, and sometimes let's hide the details. So we see a bunch of information here, and give me a second here. So a lot of requests made on your behalf, and I wanted to see the raw. I don't know why this keeps when I hover over that. So let's see all. Let's see preserve log. Let's try it again. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. Okay, we can see the headers that went in there, right? And we can see headers for the request. So the request went in with this request. It was a get, a return okay, 200 is okay. Let me see if I can extend this a little bit more. Oh, not that. I want to make this bigger. Okay, we can see the headers. We can see the cache control. We can see security. We can see, you know, different request headers. And here's what I was talking about when we say, what do we accept? What media type? Here you can see that we accept JSON on this request, plain, or really anything here. We're telling it what we're using for the browser. And when we look at the response, and if we look at it here, this is pretty raw what comes back, but here are the response headers that came back with that, right? So a bunch of information there. And if you go, for example, to a form, you can see a lot of times what's in the body and what's in the request and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully this thing clarifies some things about requests. We're going to get more into it in actual concrete implementations. And so just stay tuned and we'll do that. Thanks for watching.